Greetings. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Well, today we're going to read another Christmas story. This is actually called A Merry Christmas, and it's written by Louisa May Alcott. Does anybody remember her? It's an old story. There are no pictures. Let's see, it was written, let's see when it was written. Penguin Books. Well, you know, it doesn't actually say when it was written. She lived between 1832 and 1888. It's a kind of a pretty cover. And it's called A Christmas Story. This isn't like reading something like the Dr. Seuss books or something that flows. This is Old English. A Merry Christmas. From Little Woman. Was the first to wake in the gray dawn of Christmas morning. No stockings were hung at the fireplace, and for a moment she felt as much disappointed as she did long ago, when her little sock fell down because it was so crammed with goodies. Then she remembered her mother's promise, and slipping her hand under her pillow, drew out a little crimson-covered book. She knew it very well, for it was a beautiful old story of the best life ever lived, and Joe felt that it was a true guidebook for any pilgrim going a long journey. She woke Meg with a Merry Christmas and bade her see what was under her pillow. A green-covered book appeared with the same picture inside and a few words written by their mother, which made their one present very precious in their eyes. Presently, Beth and Amy woke to rummage and find their little books also. One drove colored, the other blue, all sat looking at and talking about them, while the east grew rosy with the coming of the day. In spite of her small vanities, Margaret had a sweet and pious nature. Which unconsciously influenced her sisters, especially Jo, who loved her very tenderly and obeyed her because her advice was so gently given. "Girls," said Meg seriously, looking from the tumbled head beside her to her little nightcap, one in the room beyond. Mother wants us to read and love and mind these books, and we must begin at once. We used to be faithful about it, but since Father went away and all this war trouble unsettled us, we have neglected many things. You can do as you please, but I shall keep my book on the table here and read a little every morning as soon as I wake, for I know it'll be good for me and help me through the day. Then she opened her new book and began to read. Jo put her arm around her and, leaning cheek to cheek, read also, with the quiet expression so seldom seen on her restless face. How good Meg is. Come, Amy, let's do as they do. I'll help you with the hard words, and they'll explain things if we don't understand. Whispering, Beth, very much impressed by the pretty books and her sister's example. I'm glad mine is blue, said Amy, and then the rooms were very still while the pages were softly turned, and the winter sunshine crept in to touch the bright heads and the serious faces with a Christmas greeting. Where is Mother? Asked Meg, as she and Jo ran down to thank her for her gifts a half hour later. Goodness only knows. Some poor creature come vegan, and your ma went straight off to see what was needed. There never was such a woman for giving away victuals and drink, clothes and fern, replied Hannah, who had lived with the family since Meg was born and was considered by them all more as a friend than a servant. She went back soon, I guess. So do your cakes and have everything ready, said Meg, looking over the presents which were collected in a basket and kept under the sofa, ready to be produced at the proper time. Why, where is Amy's bottle of cologne? She added, as the little flask did not appear. She took it out for a minute ago and went off with it to put a ribbon on it, or some such notion, replied Jo, dancing about the room to take the first stiffness off the new army slippers. How nice my handkerchiefs looked, don't they? Hannah washed and ironed them for me, and I marked them all myself, said Beth, looking proudly at the somewhat uneven letters which had cost such a labor. Bless the child, she's gone and put Mother on them instead of M. March. How funny, cried Jo, taking up one. Isn't it right? I thought it was better to do it so, because Meg's initials are MM. And I don't want anyone to use these but Marmee, said Beth, looking troubled. It's all right, dear. And very pretty idea, quite the sensible too. For no one can even mistake it now. It will please her very much, I know, said Meg, with a frown for Joe and a smile for Beth. There's Mother. Hide the basket quick, cried Joe, as the door slammed and the steps sounded in the hall. Amy came in hastily and looked rather abashed when she saw her sisters all waiting for her. Where have you been, and what are you hiding behind you? Asked Meg, surprised to see by her hood and cloak that lazy Amy had been out so early. Don't laugh at me, Joe. I didn't mean anyone should. No, all our time came. I only meant to change the little ball for the big one. And I gave all my money to get it. And I'm truly trying not to be selfish anymore. As she spoke, Amy showed the handsome flask which replaced the cheap ones, and looked so earnest and humble in the little effort to forget herself that Meg hugged her on the spot and choked her down. While Beth ran to the window and picked her finest rose to ornament the stately bottle. You see, I felt ashamed of my presence after reading and talking about being good this morning. So I ran around the corner and changed it in a minute, and I was up. I am so glad, for mine is the handsome now. Another bang of the street door sent the basket under the sofa and the girls to the table, eager for breakfast. Merry Christmas, Marmee. Lots of them. Thank you for our books. We read some and we mean to every day. They cried in chorus. Merry Christmas, little daughters. I'm glad you began at once and I hope you'll keep on. But I want to say one word before we sit down. Not far away from the lies a poor woman with a little newborn baby. 6 children are huddled into one bed to keep from freezing, for they have no fire. There is nothing to eat over there, and the oldest boy came to tell me they were suffering hunger and cold. My girls, will you give them your breakfast as a Christmas present? They were unusually hungry, having waited nearly an hour, and for a minute no one spoke. Only a minute, for Joe exclaimed impetuously, I'm so glad you came before we began. May I go and help carry the things to the poor little children? Asked Beth eagerly. I shall take the cream and the muffins, added Amy. giving up the articles she most liked. Meg was already covering the buckwheat and piling the bread into one big plate. "I thought you'd do it," said Mrs. March, smiling as if satisfied. "You shall all go and help me, and when we come back, we will have bread and milk for breakfast, and make it up at dinner time." They were soon ready, and the procession set out. Fortunately, it was early, and they went through back streets, so few people saw them, and no one laughed at the funny party. A poor, bare, miserable room it was, with broken windows and no fire, ragged clothes, a sick mother, wailing baby, and a group of pale, hungry children cuddled under one quilt, trying to keep warm. How the big eyes stared and the blue lips smiled as the children went in. "Ach, Ben Gott, it is a good angel come to us," cried the poor woman, crying for joy. "Funny angels in hoods and mittens," said Joe, and set them laughing. In a few minutes, it really did seem as if kind spirits had been at work there. Hannah, who had carried wood, made a fire and stopped up the broken panes with an old hat and her own shawl. Mrs. March gave the mother tea and gruel and comforted her with promise of help, while she dressed the little baby as tenderly as if she had her own. The girls, meantime, spread the table and set the children around the fire, and fed them like so many hungry birds, laughing, talking, and trying to understand the funny broken English. "Das ist gut, der Angel Kinder," cried the poor thing, as they ate and warmed their purple hands at the comfortable blaze. The girls had never been called angels' children before, and thought it was very agreeable, especially Joe, who had been considered a Sancho ever since she was born. There was a very happy breakfast, though they didn't get any of it, and they went away, leaving comfort behind. I think there were not in all the city 4 merrier people than the hungry little girls who gave away their breakfast and contented themselves with bread and milk on Christmas morning. That's loving our neighbor better than ourselves, and I like it, said Meg, as they set out their presents while their mother was upstairs collecting clothes for the poor Hummels. Not a very splendid show, but there was a great deal of love done up on the few little bundles, and the tall vase of red roses, white chrysanthemums, and trailing vines, which stood in the middle and gave quite the elegant air to the table. She's coming. Strike up, Beth, and open the door, Amy. 3 cheers for Marmee, cried Joe, prancing about, while Meg went to conduct Mother. the seat of the honor. Beth played her gayest march. Amy threw open the door and Meg enacted escort with great dignity. Mrs. March was both surprised and touched, and smiled with her eyes full as she examined her presents and read the little notes which accompanied them. The slippers went on at once. A new handkerchief was slipped into her pocket, as well scented with Amy's cologne. The rose was fastened to her bosom, and the nice gloves were pronounced as perfect fit. There was a good deal of laughing and kissing and explaining in the simple, loving fashion which makes these home festivals so pleasant at the time, so sweet to remember long afterwards. And they all fell to work. The morning charities and ceremonies took so much time that the rest of the day was devoted to preparations for the evening festivities. Being still too young to go often to the theater, and not rich enough to afford any great outlay of private performances, the girls put their wits to work, and the necessity began. The mother of invention made whatever they needed. Very clever were some of their productions. Pasteboard guitars, antique lamps made of old-fashioned butter boats covered with silver paper. Gorgeous robes of old cotton glittered with tin spangles from the pickle factory, and an armored cupboard with the same useful diamond-shaped bits left in sheets when the lids of the tin preserve pots were cut out. The furniture was used to be being turned into topsy-turvies. Topsy-turvies. And the big chamber was the scene of many innocent revels. No gentlemen were admitted, so Joe played male parts to their heart's content and took immense satisfaction in a pair of russet leather boots given her by a friend who knew a lady who knew an actor. These boots, an old foil, and a slashed Talbot, once used by an artist for some picture, were Joe Chief's treasure, and appeared on all occasions. The smallest of the company made it necessary for their two principal actors to take several parts apiece. And they were certainly deserved some credit for their hard work they did in learning 3 or 4 different parts, whisking in and out of various costumes, and managing to stage besides. On Christmas night, a dozen girls piled onto the bed, which was the dress circle, and sat before the blue and yellow chintz curtains in a most flattering state of expectation. There was a good deal of rustling and whispering behind the curtain, a trifle of lamp smoke, and an occasional giggle from Amy, who was apt to get hysterical in the excitement of the moment. Presently, a bell sounded. The curtains flew apart, and the operatic tragedy began. A gloomy wood, according to the one playbill, was presented by a few shrubs in pots, a green baize on the floor, and a cave in the distance. This cave was made with a clothes horse for a roof, bureaus for walls, and in it was a small furnace in full blast with a black pot on it and an old witch bending over it. The stage was dark, and the glow of the furnace had a fine effect, especially as the steam issued from the kettle when the witch took off the cover. A moment allowed for the first shrill to subside, and then Hugo, the villain, stalked in with a clanking sword at his side, and a slouched hat, black beard, and a mysterious cloak, and the boots. Oh, what boots! After pacing to and fro in much citation, he struck his forehead and burst out a wild strain, singing his hatred to Rodrigo, his love for Zara, and his pleasing resolution to kill the one and win the other. The gruff tones of Hugo's voice, with an occasional shout when his feelings overcame him, were very impressive, and the audience applauded. The moment he paused for breath, bowing with the air of one accomplished to public praise, he stole to the cavern and ordered Hagar to come forth with a commanding, "What ho, minion, I need thee. I need thee." Out came Meg with a gray horsehair hanging about her face, a red and black robe, a staff, cabalistic signs upon her cloak. Hugo demanded a potion to make Zara adore him and once destroy Rodrigo. Hagar, in a fine dramatic melody, promised both and proceeded to come. Hagar, in a fine dramatic melody, promised both and proceeded to call up the spirit who would bring the love philter. Hither, hither from thy home, airy sprite, I bid thy come. Born of roses, fed on dew, charms and portions canst thou brew. Bring me here with elfin speed, and franken filler which I need. Make it sweet and swift and strong. Spirit, answer now my song. A soft strain of music sounded, and then at the back of the cave appeared a little figure in cloudy white glitter, wings and golden hair and garland of roses on its head. Waving a wand, it sung, "Hither I come from my airy home, afar in the silver moon. Take the magic spell, oh, use it well, or its power all will vanish soon." Curious, isn't it? And dropping a small gilded bottle at the witch's feet, the spirit vanished. Another chant from Hagar produced another apparition, not a lonely one, for with a bang, an ugly black imp appeared, and having croaked a reply, tossed the dark bottle at Hugo, and disappeared with a mocking laugh. Having wobbled his thanks and put a portion of his boots, Hugo departed, and Hagar informed the audience that he had killed a few of her friends in the past. She has cursed him and intended sort his plan and revenge on him. Quite the story for a Christmas Day, don't you think? Well, they had fun back there in the 1800s. Then the curtain fell and the audience reposed and ate candy while discussing the merits of the play. A good deal of hammering went on before the curtain rose again. But when it became evident what a masterpiece of stage carpentering had been up and gone, no one murmured at the delay. It was truly superb. A tower rose to the ceiling. Halfway up appeared in a window with a lamp burning at it, and behind the white curtain appeared Zara in a lovely blue and silver dress, waiting for Rodrigo. He came in a gorgeous array with plump cap, red cloak, chestnut love locks, a guitar, and the boots, and of boots, of course. Kneeling at the foot of the tower, he sung a serenade in the melting zones. Sarah replied, and after our musical dialogue, consently to fly. They came the granted effects of the play. Rodrigo produced a rope ladder with 5 steps to it, threw up one end, and invited Zara to descend. Timidly, she crept from her lattice, put her hand on Rodrigo's shoulder, and was about to leap gracefully down when, alas, alas for Zorro! She forgot her train. It caught in the window, and the tower tottered, leaned forward, and fell with a crash, and buried the unhappy lovers in the ruins. A universal shriek arose as the rustic boots waved wildly from the wreck, and a golden head emerged, exclaiming, "I told you so, I told you so." With wonderful presence of mind, Don Pedro, the cruel sire, rushed in and dragged out his daughter with a hasty aside. Don't laugh as if it was all right, and ordering Rodrigo up, banished him from all the kingdom with rash and scorn. Thoroughly decided, shakenly by the fall of the tower upon him, Rodrigo defied the old gentleman and refused to stir. This dauntless example fired Zara. She also defied her sire, and he ordered them both to deepest dungeons of the castle. The castle? This gets better and better. A stout little retainer came in with chains and led them away, looking frightened and evidently forgetting the speech he ought to have made. Third act was the castle hall, and here Hagar appeared, having come to free the lovers and finish Hugo. She hears him coming and hides and sees him putting the potions into 2 cups of wine, and bid the timid little servant. See the things you can do with creativity at home if you don't have electronic things to play with? Isn't it amazing? Wouldn't that be quite the curious thing to have a no electronics day on Christmas Day and just play with things that don't plug in? I lost my spot. Bear them to the captives in the cells and tell them I shall come unknown. Actually, you could do it once a month. Family day, have a family day with no electronics. The servant takes Hugo aside to tell him something, and Hagar changes the cups for the 2 lovers, which are harmless. Fernando, the minion, carries them away, and Hagar puts back the cup which holds the poison meant for Rodrigo. Hugo, getting thirsty after a long wobble, drinks it and loses his wits, and after a good deal of clutching and stamping, falls flat and dies, while Hagar informs him what she has done in the song of the exquisite power and melody. This was truly a thrilling scene, though. Some persons might have thought that the sudden tumbling down of the quantity of long hair rather marred the effect of the villain's death. He was called before the curtain, and with great He was called before the curtain, and with great priority appeared leading Hagar, whose singing was considered more wonderful than all the rest of the performance put together. Act 4. displaying the despairing Rodrigo on the point of stabbing himself because he has been told that Zara has deserted him. Just as dagger is at his heart, a lovely song is sung under the window, informing him that Zara is true, but in dagger, and can save her if he will. A key to throw. A key is thrown in which unlocks the door, and in a spasm of rapture, he tears off his chains and rushes away to find a rescue of his lady love. Act 5, actually Act 5th. Act 5th. Opened with a stormy scene between Zara and this is all in somebody's living room. It's just funny when you try to think about this whole thing happening in someone's house. Act 5th opened with a stormy scene between Zara and Don Pedro. He wishes her to go into a convent, but he won't hear of it. And after a touching appeal, is about to faint when Rodrigo dashes in and demands her hand. Don Pedro refuses because he is not rich. They shout and gesticulate tremendously, but cannot agree, and Rodrigo is about to bear away the exhausted Zara when the timid servant enters with a letter and a bag of Hagar, who has mysteriously disappeared. The letter informs the party that she bequeaths. The letter informs the party that she bequeaths untold wealth. Open with a stormy scene between Zara and Don Pedro. He wishes her to go into a convent, but she won't hear of it. And after touching appeal, is about to faint when Rodrigo dashes in and demands her hand. Don Pedro refuses because he is not rich. They shout and they gesticulate and tremendously, but cannot agree. And Rodrigo is about to bear away the exhausted Zara when the timid servant enters with a letter and a bag from Hagar, who has mysteriously disappeared. The letter informs the party that she bequeaths untold wealth to the young pair, and the awful doom to Don Pedro if he doesn't make them happy. The bag is opened, and several quarts of tin money showered down upon the stage till it is quite glorified with the glitter. This entirely softens the stern desire. He consents with a murmur. All join in a joyful chorus. And the curtain falls upon the lovers kneeling to receive Don Pedro's blessing in attitude of the most manic This entirely softens the stern desire. He consents without a murmur. All join in the joyful chorus, and the curtain falls upon the lovers kneeling to receive Don Pedro's blessing in attitude of the most romantic grace. Tumultuously a pause followed, but received an unexpected check, for the cot bed on which the dress circle was built suddenly shut up and extinguished. The ecstatic audience, Rodrigo and Pedro, flew to the rescue, and all were taken out unhurt, though many were speechless with laughter. The excitement had hardly subsided when Hannah appeared with Mrs. March compliments, and would the ladies walk down to supper. This was a surprise even to the actors, and when they saw the table they looked at one another in rapture amazement. It was like Marmee to get up a little treat for them. But anything so fine as this was unheard of since the departed days of plenty. There was ice cream, and actually 2 dishes of it, pink and white, and cake, and fruit, and distracting French bonbons. And in the middle of the table, 4 great bouquets of hot house flowers. Hot house flowers. Now that explains how they can have flowers in the winter. It quite took their breath away, and they stared first at the table, and then at their mother, who looked as if enjoyed it immensely. "It is the fairies?" asked Amy. Oops. "Is it the fairies?" asked Amy. "Well, of course it's the fairies, because why else would I be reading this? I always read about fairies. Who knew?" "It's Santa Claus," said Beth. "Mother did it," and Meg smiled at her sweetness in spite of her gray beard and white eyebrows. Aunt March had a good fit and sent the supper, cried Joe with a sudden inspiration. "All wrong, old Mr. Lawrence sent it," replied Mrs. March. "All wrong, old Mr. Lawrence sent it," replied Mrs. March. "The Lawrence boy's grandfather, what in the world put such a thing into his head?" "We don't know him," exclaimed Meg. "Hannah told one of his servants about your breakfast party, and he an old gentleman, but that pleased him. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note to this afternoon saying that he hoped. He knew my father years ago and sent me a polite note this afternoon saying he hoped the Lawrence boy's grandfather, what in the world put such a thing into his head? We don't know him, exclaimed Meg. Hannah told one of his servants about your breakfast party. He's an odd old gentleman, but that pleased him. He knew my father years ago, and he sent me a polite note this afternoon saying he hoped I would allow him to express his friendly feeling towards my children by sending them their few rifles in honor of the day. I could not refuse, and you have a little feast at night to make up for the bread and milk for breakfast. That boy put it in his head. I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. He looks as if he liked to know us, but he's bashful. That boy put it in his head. I know he did. He's a capital fellow, and I wish we could get acquainted. He looks as if he'd like to know us, but he's bashful. And Meg is so prim, she won't let me speak to him when we pass, said Joe. As the plates went round and the ice began to melt, he looks as if he'd like to know us, but he's bashful, and Meg is so prim, she won't let me speak to him when we pass. As the plates went round and the ice began to melt out of sight, with ohs and ahs of satisfaction. You mean the people live in the big houses next to the door you don't mind? My mother knows old Mr. Lawrence, but says he's very proud and doesn't like to mix with his neighbors. He keeps his grandson shut up when he isn't riding or walking with his tutor, and makes him study dreadfully hard. We invite him to our party, but he didn't come. Mother says he's very nice, though, and he never speaks to us girls. Our cat ran away once, and he brought her back, and we talked over the fence, and was getting on capitally, all about cricket. I meant to know him someday, for he needs to have fun. I'm sure he does, says Joe decidedly. I like his manners, and he looks like a little gentleman, so I have no objection to your knowing him if a proper opportunity comes. He brought flowers himself, and I have asked him if he had been sure as what was going on upstairs. I like his manners, and he looks like a little gentleman, so I have no objection to your knowing him if a proper opportunity comes. He brought the flowers himself. I should have asked him in. It's a mercy you didn't, Mother, laughing Joe, looking at her boots. But we'll have another play day sometime that he can see. Meg examined her flowers with great interest. They are lovely, but Beth's roses are sweeter than me, and said Mrs. March, sniffling at the half-dead posy in her belt. Beth nestled up to her and whispered softly, I wish I could send my bunch to Father. I'm afraid he isn't having such a Merry Christmas as we. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.